Hi, everyone. Welcome to our next session, Secure by Design with ASPM, a new operating model for application security. I'm your host, Jimmy Shu, Field CTO, SiteCode. I'm very happy, delighted to introduce you to Clint Huffaker from WWT, who's joined this discussion. Clint, welcome.
Hey, thank you. Glad to be here.
So Clint leads application security as a global cybersecurity solution architect at WBT. He's a practitioner, has over 20 years of experience in the field with deep technical acumen. Clint, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. So, as you mentioned, Global Cyber Solutions Architect over here at WWT, really focused on everything app API security, but really from code to runtime. So, very broad set of responsibility we have here on this team, as you can imagine, with digital transformation and cloud, and really a lot of disruption here around AI. This market is extremely hot and has a lot of responsibility and big conversations with large enterprises across the globe.
Thank you, Clint. And I know you for we know each other for a while, right? Both practitioners. For the audience, I'm very excited today because you're having two practitioners talking about this very hot topic. But I gotta ask before we start the main questions here, Clint, right? When I was in your shoes, right, I was doing that. I know that WBT, you guys in the last few years, this seems to be a very strong shift focus on app security, which is usually in the past you weren't. It got to be something about the market, about the current state of app security that's really creating this demand that there's a lot of investment. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think cloud is definitely an initiator of that movement and really a digital first mindset for a lot of our customers, right? As they've moved from products to digital products or, with an application or the API with the interoperability across the ecosystem and really looking from one company talking to another company. It's really kind of the generator of revenue, right? So as you look through this, profound industry from products to services to retail to travel, right? Everything is really driven by digital. And with that initiative really comes digital transformation. And now that's really exacerbated and accelerated rather by AI. Right. So the problems that are profound, not only in immature application security programs, is really a future problem for AI, right? Is this really being accelerated and adopted through the multiplication of developers and the number of developers that come on board, whether they're onshore or offshore, has really kind of allowed us an opportunity to advance and kind of move into a new sector that isn't so much infrastructure driven, but definitely digital in the cloud as well.
Thank you. Yeah. Obviously, AppSec, and I've tell all my clients that it's gone through quite a bit of evolution. It's more important now than ever to the reasons that you described. I know that you've had the opportunity where you work at, you work with many different largest enterprises in the world, right? And for those customers, based on what you've heard recently, for today, current state as you described, what are their mindset around approach to app security? Both from what is the biggest challenge they're trying to solve and how are they approaching it?
Yeah, I would say, at large, enterprises across the globe have a very defensive mindset, right? They're looking, they know what's in production, they know there's vulnerabilities there, and there's really a probability to assume that they'll be attacked. And that's why there's so many, large, complex conversations going around cyber resilience. And it's really a good understanding from the board level down to the executives and shareholders alike are really wanting to know, across the board is how will you react when you're attacked, how are you going to react, how resilient are your services going to be, what is your mean time to respond and resolve the situation and get back up and running. And I think another core challenge that we're seeing, and I think and across the board a lot of organizations are finally starting to understand is that like innovation and revenue for years has really been prioritized over security and risk, right? And cyber insurance is kind of changing that. The number and increases in breaches are happening, and really looking at the damage reputationally that these attacks can do, and to know that they're so profound, in the way that's an adaptive, advanced threat, right? And then I think finally, I would say it's kind of a lack of buy-in and culture around security to actually include the developers. and the development phases and kind of the digital assets of an organization really haven't been looked at. And that's why even data security has kind of been one of the last, plays in from a security technology domain. Once data came kind of in the optics, is that's when I feel it kind of shifted as well into the applications and the APIs as kind of that gateway to the data. And that's really what I think is kind of, make this such a profound conversation for so many to start digging into and taking it seriously.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely some takeaways for me. I can definitely say that it is really resonating. When I was doing my practitioner kind of work, one of the things that we're talking about, you talked about security have to change their mindset. It's actually right? Because see, we so many times that security team want to change developers, they actually need to start with changing themselves. But now, what's interesting you said about the priorities, the budget, the board. One of the things that I see that the the security team, at least, that when they try to make app security a priority among other security initiatives, among other business priorities, is that trying to justify using tying to dollars, right? So one of the things is, well, how do you translate cost savings? Well, one way to do that is to say, if you address vulnerabilities early, the whole shift left concept, maybe it's cheaper to solve things in development versus production. So over the last couple of years, you're probably seeing this whole big marketing and focus on shift left. But then you hear mixed opinions because, well, people, I personally think that people might have misinterpreted that the shift left means only doing things to the left. What about the right? Right. So what's your thought? Is it mix of like what's the right balance, right, about this whole shift left? Your opinion.
Yeah, and a great question. I think there's definitely it's kind of shift left, defend right, right? And if you look through that, it's kind of the lens. We can't stop defending what's in production today. The methodology and the thought around the shift left, and my take on that is, where are we at in innovation and changes and features and new products and solutions being kind of brought to market? How do we shift left on that mentality to kind of bake security in from default, right? Whether it's by the design or by default, it really, in my sense, comes back to the people in the process, right? Is they have to buy into that. You have to have an organization that prioritizes risk across the enterprise and across the entire platform, right? This isn't just an application security problem. This is a vulnerability problem that looks at containers, it looks at cloud instances, it looks across the network, the endpoints, everything of how somebody's accessing these applications, and the data ultimately is it all has to fundamentally start, sooner, right? Because we know the methodologies of security that have been in place today are continue to be, penetrated. And once that user session reaches that login form, all bets are off, right? So if there's vulnerabilities there, if somebody wants to try hard enough, they probably will find something in many cases, and that's where the defense starts to come in. But many times the pace of innovation and development is so much faster than the defense teams or the security teams that things get brought to market before they're actually, secured. Right. So it's kind of that secure left mentality versus the defend right. And it really comes down to like asking questions and really considering, application security is part of like the overall security hygiene, and be open to change on how they move forward, wanting to kind of learn best practices and security gaps and the risk associated with code. But more importantly, I really think, in the entire industry, this really comes down to a people and process solution across the organization where people have to buy into this methodology.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, so a couple things I take away, right? Definitely, it's the buy-in, it's definitely not just shift left, right? Got to defend the right. But as far as going as left as you can, right? As far as you talked about the secure by default, secure by design, it's actually there's some things being thrown around, right? CISA, actually came out with the secure by design principles, but in a fast-paced software delivery world today, right? You probably can't test for security, right? I mean, you just can't keep up. Every time you release something, you want to test vulnerability. What's your take on secure by design concept? How does
Yeah,
it align with the modern software
secure by
development?
design. Yeah, it's definitely a significant shift, right? As you look through, secure software development, making it more like proactive and integrated from the start, it's not only more sustainable long term, especially as we look into the phase of AI and software development co-pilots, it's ultimately more productive and a lot lower cost, right? As you look through the common themes and problems that we have, security has many times been an afterthought, where we served on the tools and the purposes of like a web app firewall or API security or bot mitigation. And again, if I step this back to a culture side of DevSecOps, is another term in the industry, is where we really look at the people and the processes of embracing a proactive security culture. And I think as you look through that, you look to, how do I reduce technical debt? And if I can, limit the release of insecure code, I can limit costly retrofitting or patching or software rewrites due to vulnerabilities that are discovered after deployment. How much time savings is that going to be? Our most valuable assets typically are our people, right? So we have to look to be efficient with that. We have to be, and effective in the way that we're doing things. And it will also, secure by design looks to really enhance customers' trust and loyalty, really through, better compliance and security standards, and ultimately from a breach standpoint, limiting even legal liabilities. But as everything kind of pulls back, it fits well into a modern DevSecOps practice, where security is baked in. But it's also very hard because the maturity of a DevOps organization is their methodology is to turn out more features, more changes, more innovation faster, right? So anything on the security side has many times been seen as a gate. So that's where automation starts to come in. That's where, application security orchestration, and really where we're seeing, a lot of things is being able to prioritize the vulnerabilities that are found with the tools they have, or displacing the tools that they have today with better technologies that are more integrated to provide more context and reduce the number of false positives, and really give a faster mean time to respond, to the vulnerabilities that really come through that pipeline today.
Thank you. Yeah, you definitely think you're spot on, right? Many you can't just do security without understanding how software is delivered. So aligning with DevOps, to your point, many organizations, even enterprises, they are probably various form of DevOps journey, but being able to tie it into their journey, whether it's where they are in terms of automation, in terms of continuous flow, that's how you inject security. To your point, then you're not necessarily backed in. So absolutely. From that point, then and I'd also like to hit on the people and process side of things. You're absolutely correct, right? It's been 10 years, I remember, since the DevSecOps manifesto. It's they started talking about this 10 years ago. It's about culture shift, right? Culture means people and process. So as we think about modernizing our tool chains, you talk about the innovation technologies. It goes back to the people and process, right? When I was a consultant, right, one of the things that I noticed when I helped client build a DevSecOps program, one of the very first thing I call out is to modernize the operating model. Right, operating model is a foundation for people process. Um, what do you see, right? That what do you think about the common operating model today in AppSec? Is it broken? Does it need also needs innovation, needs modernizing? What are some of the challenges you think that needs to change?
Yeah, no, good question. I think, in short, many teams are used to focusing on functionality and performance over security, right? It's seriously that simple. And as you look at the features and new projects that are prioritized over fixing what's already there today, that's a pretty big attack surface, right? Because there's a lot more in production than is being rolled out every day. But I commonly point out that there's more apps and APIs in production today than there was yesterday, right? And I think what it really boils down to is from the leadership down, is there's really a lack of accountability and ownership for the problem. And that's come through budget, that's come through prioritization, and really disowning the fact that digital assets really are the crown jewels of an organization today. So it really is kind of a requirement to restructure the way we think about security and approach our security hygiene and posture overall. And you're also seeing that, in certain verticals like financial services, where exams are getting very specific around APIs and their security, or the application. So you're starting to see this stuff, tick up a little bit more beyond the frameworks of NIST and, ISO and other frameworks like that, is really starting to look at functionally the apps and the APIs as kind of that gateway to the data. That's really, a profound interest for so many, where the maturity or the lack of maturity is really starting to come into play, aligned to the risk of customers. So that's kind of what I see from an operating model, and really some of the challenges around it today.
Absolutely. We can talk about operating model all day, right? One thing that I've noticed during my days in operating model is also, especially large enterprises, going back to it's not just between security and developers, right? The DevOps team play a huge role in terms of having the crown jewels of everything that has to do with the software delivery mechanism. A lot of times, you think about the back to the technology space, there are overlapping technologies, right? Like GitHub, for example, JFrog, they all have some security testing features. So ensure that people work together, talk about accountability. Well, who should be doing what? So one of the things, how do you solve the culture thing when both different teams have different responsibility for different technology that does the same thing? So with that, what are your thoughts around in terms of operating model shifting to what needs to be from a tools consolidation perspective, right? Using something, a third party that plays nice with every tool, right? Whether it's consolidate or like an ASPM that takes in from multiple teams tools and just be the mediator that make people be friends again. So what's your thought?
Yeah, I think, in short, I keep belaboring the point of people and process, right? There has to be accountability and there has to be ownership at nearly every level, right? And as you look at the tool overlap, the tool sprawl, and the FUD in the market, candidly, I think security needs turned upside down. I think the legacy approach of starting security with a consideration of your edge and perimeter security with your next gen firewalls or other, SaaS type services, is great, and it's still needed, right? In a layer by defense model, but if you flip that on its head and you really look at like, where's my crown jewel, where's my data, and you start looking at security from that point, from data ownership, data stewardship, and data permissions, right? Of what app is using that, why are they using it, when and where and how, right? If you start looking at that, you start mapping backwards to your applications and your APIs. And really the modern security architecture, in my eyes, should start at the data and work towards the client. And the overall fundamental responsibility for any tool or any practice should to be to reduce the number of false positives, and seeing a lot of success around that with risk-based vulnerability management, with which kind of overlaps or integrates with ASPM and other security posture tools. Some tools are very specific to cloud environments while others are really hybrid. But I think the key to it is really prioritization and context, right? As you look to approach security in that manner, and really minimizing the noise and focus on your mean time to resolve, where you truly start to understand the full scope of fixing and resolving issues beyond the actual downtime they cause. That's when you really start to get more of a holistic view of kind of the security practice and maturity overall.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you mentioned a couple of great things. Going obviously we're talking about technology here, right? Focus back on the technology side. So yeah, reducing noise, right? One of the things that I always talk about is building trust, right? Well, how do you build trust if you give them garbage, right? So that's why the,
Yep.
the role of technology that consolidates all the noises and help prioritize. And you talk about the risk-based phone management, you talk about ASPM, you talk about overlaps. From what we have seen in the last couple of years, obviously the role of RBVM, ASPM, especially ASPM, have evolved quite a bit. Can you share with us what have you seen in the evolution of the ASPM in the last couple of years?
Yeah, well, I mean, to start off, tools consolidation is huge, right? That's a massive topic for CISOs. Recently a CISO even told us that, for every tool that they add, they want to replace two, right? So if you already look at, hey, what are my other tools in this arena? WWT does a lot of, security tools assessments or rationalization to kind of figure out what is baseline, where are we at today. But from an ASPM standpoint, right, as you got, it kind of went from the first wave of you had aggregators, right? So it was taking a bunch of signals from different security tools, bringing it all in, and really kind of throwing what you would call a UX on top of a SIM, right? That was very specific to application security tools. And then kind of behind that, you started to see really an overhaul where, scanners started to get added, whether they were open source scanners or native scanners, or integration with other scanners. You also saw some of the big players in the market that were typically your application security testing tools, whether they were static or dynamic or integrated, whatever, where they started building like ASPM type features into their portfolio, but they may not expand and integrate with other third party solutions. So it's kind of like building ASPM in a box, right? But then you move on from there, that's more dynamic, that kind of runs more, a little bit more, uh, you know, almost like app dependency mapping, right? Where you look at the dependencies along the entire platform of and chain of command of an application, where it's running, where that instance is, what the EC2 instance is, all of these different things. So you start to see these different waves of ASPM. And I commonly joke that like ASPM doesn't even know what it wants to be when it grows up yet. Right. But there are many companies that are trying to get a hold of this and a grasp on it. Psycode, and others are definitely leading in this arena, while other players, are coming in and trying to fight for that market share. But ultimately, it kind of comes down to one common theme of let's build again around the people in the process. How can we bridge between the AppSec teams and the developers and the AppSec and the security teams on up to GRC, as well as really how we're kind of seeing that from a consolidation and the options across the ASPM market today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you, before joining Cycle, I've seen that shift already. Um, from our standpoint, right, going back to, we get a lot of hits too, right? So how do you actually categorize, make sense of all these innovations, different types of ASPN, right? So here we think that for the audience purposes, right, from the ASPN market, what we see is three waves, right? Wave one is the standalone, we call it standalone ASPMs that are just taking the feeds from third party, right? Aggregating vulnerabilities. They use the word ASOC, right? Application Security
Yep.
Orchestration. You talk about orchestration and correlation, but that's really just aggregation and deduplication, right? There's no really contextual analysis risk. So there's obviously limited value, just like if fitting everything into the SIM without analytics is just garbage in, garbage out. Then wave two, around the same time, because you talked about the DevOps type of supply chain, there's so much focus around how do we compromise the supply chain from ideation to production, the whole software delivery system. So there are ASPs that focus on those areas as a primary as they move into the aggregation. Then there's the wave three, which is the complete ASPM that have native scanners that have everything else, which Cycle being one of them, right? So that's just a lot going out there. We're also seeing that WBT have posted some videos educating the market, which is very great. We think that the audience in the market does need that kind of education. And to your point, it doesn't matter how you call it. It should not be a feature-based comparison. It should be outcome. What are we trying to drive? Which you're spot on. So the final question would be just how do you and your peers, right, given the confusion of the market, how do you help the security leaders, your customers, navigate the market that's much needed but confusing?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's kind of funny because there's a lot of noise in the market. As you look through, there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt or FUD. Every vendor is trying to get a piece of the market, and that ranges from API security to app security to ASPM, CSPM, CNAP. I mean, there's so many acronyms, going out, and we talked about so much overlap. So it's really about like creating that, clarity and like what is the business outcome, right? Understand the projects that the customer's working on, understanding where they are, understanding, the human element of what capabilities do they have, how big are their teams, what are their challenges today, because sometimes introducing another tool can make the problem worse, right? Or introducing the wrong tool can make the problem worse. So really understanding the desired business outcome, is really how we're helping our customers get there as fast as possible. But I like to say we like to do that securely, right? And there's a it's more of a marketing term at WWT, but we really like to say that it's secure altogether, right? It's embracing culture around the need and desire to deliver secure business outcomes.
Thank you. Very well. I hope it's valuable for you for the audience. Great discussion, Clint. Thank you so much. We had time. I can't. describe how excited I am to have this discussion with you. So hopefully, the audience, you have good takeaways from us. With that, I'm now heading back to Shauna, who will be sharing an exciting preview of the session coming up next. Stay tuned, and thank you, Clint.
Sounds good. Thank you for your time.